So the title of this video is partially clickbait, but only partially, and let me explain why. So I don't actually think that discipline is worse than motivation, at least not in the most obvious sense, but I also think that there's a lot of misconceptions surrounding the ideas of motivation and discipline. And you hear this question a lot of what is better? Is motivation better or is discipline better? What should I be using, or how should I get my motivation? Or I don't feel motivated, or I don't feel disciplined, or I don't have the energy to do things all the time. And I think the most common paradigm that you're going to find is that people are told, when people have high goals and they actually want to achieve them, they're told they need discipline to get them where they want to go. After all, if they only do things when they're most motivated to do them, they're never going to actually get anywhere long term, right? Now, that is right. That's true in a lot of senses, and I've most certainly been down that path of only relying on discipline to get me where I want to go. And I'm sure you have as well if you're watching this. But I think that overfixation on discipline actually leads to a lot of problems. And when you don't add motivation into the mix and actually understand how these terms work together, you run into a lot of problems. You run into burnout and a lot of energy issues. So first, we should probably define what motivation and discipline actually mean in the first place. So it's probably important to note that no one actually has the same definitions as another person for these terms. They're somewhat abstract, I'm trying to say. So there's no real dictionary definition as to what motivation and discipline is. Now, there probably are, but when people actually talk about these terms, no one really has the same definition for these terms. So starting with motivation, motivation is just our innate drive to do something. So to do something with only motivation, or be 100% motivated to do something, would mean that it almost takes more resistance not to do the thing. Like, you really do want to do that thing. That's what it means to be motivated to do something. Now, discipline, on the other hand, is or at least the definition that I'm going to use for right now, is that discipline is your use of willpower and essentially manual force to do something, regardless of how you feel about it. You essentially are taking manual control of the wheel and doing something, and essentially ignoring whatever innate drive, whatever innate desires you have to either do that thing or not do that thing. You just do it regardless, which of course sounds about in line with what we're told. You do it whether you feel like doing it or not, because you aren't always going to feel like doing things. But I'm going to talk about the dangers of discipline and the problems that I've seen come up in other people, that make discipline very dangerous if you don't actually understand what you're doing when you use discipline. So, yes, discipline is important. Let's get that out of the way first. There is no magic pill that's going to get you motivated all the time, or that's going to make it so that you don't have to exert effort to get to where you want to go or to achieve your goals. Discipline and willpower and motivation and difficulty, effort, resistance, whatever words you want to use, are always going to be a part of the mix. That is a fact. I don't have a magic pill to sell you, so if that's you, which it probably isn't, then obviously this video is not going to be very relevant. But what we are talking about is this repeated excessive forcing of discipline. So the more you force something for a period of time, that is using only discipline, you're actually going to build a lot of mental fatigue. So a lot of people, when they feel more resistance, they think what they need is more willpower to force through and make the things they want to happen. And oftentimes they're left wondering what they're doing wrong, when at a certain point they just don't have the energy to make it happen anymore. That's essentially what burnout is. You push harder and harder, using more and more discipline, that is willpower, again and again, and at a certain point you just can't do it anymore. Now, using discipline is in fact possible. I mean, using only discipline, but it is really a specialized skill. So you might be saying, well, if you had a lot of discipline, if you had a lot of willpower, you would just be able to keep pushing. And that's absolutely true. There are professions, careers, skills, whatever you want to call them. There are people who quite literally live their lives off of only discipline. For me, David Goggins comes to mind because, well, I don't know that much about David Goggins. Maybe I'm misunderstanding his thing, so to speak. But to me, it seems like discipline is pretty much what he lives and breathes off of. He forces and forces and forces, and boy, is he good at it. It seems to work for him. So hey, if that's you and if that's him, you probably don't need the help of this video anyways. But I think for the vast majority of people, and I think people who want to achieve mental wellness and a level of effortlessness in their daily lives, and plus achieving their goals, that excessive forcing is not necessarily going to be the way, unless you quite literally enjoy it. And if that's you, you probably already know that that's you. So when you keep pushing through that resistance, that increased resistance, even if you manage to do it, keep in mind, resistance is something that can be built over time. That is willpower. you may actually be able to get to the point where you can actually push through and get to your goals using only discipline. It's not like you're not going to achieve your goals using only discipline. But keep in mind, even if you do achieve your goals using only discipline, at the end of the day, something really bad can happen. And that is that even after you've achieved all of your goals, if you've done it using only discipline, only willpower, without ever stopping to actually assess your motivation for doing something, you can essentially get to your goal and find out once you get there that you've kind of just wasted your time, that you don't actually feel good about it. Maybe it's not the actual thing you're doing itself, but you've built up that negative mental association with it over time. And you're now at the point where just the simple thought of it, you now associate with that resistance, with that kind of soul sucking, like, you know what I'm talking about, that sense of forcing willpower and difficulty and resistance. Now, if you actually have a positive mental association with discipline, with resistance, with difficulty, with discomfort, with suffering, then maybe that's the way for you. But I think for most people, that probably isn't going to be the case. And that's not to mention that at a certain point, someone might just keep trying to force using discipline, think that that's the only way, keep trying to force it, and then assume that they're just not cut out for it when they don't have the energy to make it happen anymore. Again, that's what burnout is. I mean, they'll start to wonder at a certain point, why am I putting myself through hell when I can quite literally just stop? Everything will get better in my life. There is a way that you can, there is a way where you can actually achieve your goals without having to force through discipline, or without having to force through all that excessive resistance, I should say, and you actually don't build up those negative mental associations or get this sense of like kind of unnecessary suffering and torturing of yourself. So that would be motivation. When you're motivated to do something, you don't actually have to force yourself. You feel sufficient drive to do something, which means that the resistance that it takes to actually do that action now becomes minimal. And in that sense, you also don't build fatigue over time because you aren't expending the same amount of energy to push through that resistance. And then this last point is probably the most important one, and it's what I'm really getting at with motivation. And I think what can end up being a large danger of discipline, and one of the very great things about motivation, is that when you're motivated to do something, or at least in certain cases when you're motivated to do something, you actually feel good about what you're doing because it's something that connects to your internal emotions. And that is what is often missing from a lot of these very forced to discipline actions, is that you never actually stop to assess what it is that you're doing or why you're doing it. So because of that, you end up building all these negative mental associations. You never actually feel a human reason to do what it is that you're doing. You don't feel your emotions connecting to what it is that you're doing. So in the end of the day, you essentially end up just doing something for pretty much no reason, even if it makes you money, even if it gets you glory, fame, whatever the superficial reason, whatever the superficial reasons may be that you're doing something. At the end of the day, you probably find that it may not even be worth it anymore, even if you do achieve your goal. Not to mention the large possibility that you might not even reach your goal because of all that increasing resistance that you may or may not be able to push through. Now remember, stoicism is really important, especially for men, and I actually do believe that stoicism is an incredibly important skill and something that, again, especially men, but probably all humans, need to cultivate to some extent. It's probably something that's good for society, good for the self, good for relationships, good for just about everything in human life, is emotional control. However, keep in mind that emotional control does not mean ignoring emotion, because human life essentially is emotional first, and everything else that we do, including stoicism, including rational thinking, logic, reason, all feeds into our emotional experience of life. Humans are not rational, logical, computer creatures by default. Keep that in mind. Life is an emotional experience, ultimately. So, an actual step that you can think about is, so I'd actually like you to sit down and do this with me. Now, if you are in the middle of doing something else, or you're watching this video in the background again, or in the middle of whatever, you're not going to do it right now, fair enough. But you should probably try and do this, especially if it's most applicable to you. So, think of a time when you felt burnt out from trying to force something using willpower, or felt that increasing resistance, that sense of mental fatigue, or even physical fatigue, depending on what exactly the action is. And I know you probably have one, because most people do, and especially the type of person who's watched this far into the video, I know you probably have experiences with this type of thing. So actually sit down and assess your intrinsic motivation for why you're doing something in the first place. Now, as you keep thinking about this, and I mean really dig deep, like all the way down to your most root, like it's kind of like that thing when you ask why to a question, like when a little kid comes up to you and they ask you, or you say something, you say whatever it is, and they say why, and you say the answer, and they say why again, and then why. They keep going all the way down. Why, but why, but why, but why, but why. And you actually find that you can actually get very, very far down the whys. There is a why for everything, and there's usually a farther why even after you've already answered a question initially. So really dig as far and deep as you possibly can until you find the most root kind of bedrock answer that you possibly can. Now, what you'll probably find is that either you'll remind yourself of why you care about something and why you're doing it in the first place, and you might actually find that little burst, that kind of a bit of motivation, and you'll actually feel like pursuing that thing again, or depending on whether or not you're already pursuing it right now. But you'll kind of remind yourself and be like, yeah, that is a good thing that I'm doing. This really does make sense. Or you'll find that you actually don't have a real emotional, spiritual again is not necessarily a word for religion, but it just means that you feel an emotional, really deep, purposeful connection to what you're doing. Or you'll find that you don't have that type of spiritual connection with whatever it was that you were doing, in which case you might start to question if it should have even been something that you were trying to do in the first place. Now, if that one that I just mentioned is you, that you don't feel spiritual connection to what it is you're doing, or you didn't feel spiritual connection if it's something that's in your past, now I want you to hear me and try and think of a possible replacement that you could do that you actually do care about. Something that would kind of fulfill the same purpose, will fulfill the same need, necessity in your life, whatever it is, whether it's a hobby or obviously more intensely, it could possibly be a career, though obviously you can't necessarily just change careers. But whatever it is, just try and find a replacement. Try and think of something that you actually care about and just kind of stew on it for a second. Really stop and think about this. Keep thinking. So the deeper you look into it and the deeper you think about this thing, it should actually get better. So the more you think, the deeper you dig, and the more you peel back layers of the onion, it should actually feel like something is getting better. Like there's more and more reasons to do this thing, rather than getting worse, which I think is what you'll find if you try and force things that you aren't really meant to be doing. Now, this is going to be something that is going to end up catering to your individual spirituality and purpose, and that's something that's absolutely going to be different for everyone. So my final challenge to you, and this is a big challenge, is actually go all in on it. I mean, really give yourself the chance, whatever it is. Ask yourself after you've thought of up this thing that could be a potential replacement, and think, why not? Genuinely, why not do that thing? Is there anything that's really stopping you, or are you just making up excuses? Because I think it's a very good thing to get in the habit of, and I think it's actually something that's important for life in general. There really isn't time to waste on doing things that you don't care about, unless it's very, very short term. You really should try and find a version of whatever it is you're doing that actually genuinely fills you inside and gives you real spirituality and purpose. So, whatever it is, go ahead. I challenge you for the next at least a week. Give yourself, no, I should say a month. A month is probably long enough to really feel something. Really give yourself a chance to really try and do this thing on a consistent basis. Again, it's going to depend on what exactly it is, but give it a try. Why not? And use the tactics that I'm about to give you to actually do something with it. You don't know what could happen. You never know. Give it a try. So, now, what the thought that's probably been rolling around your mind since I talked about motivation is, yeah, of course, we all know motivation is great, but the thing is, motivation is not present all the time. That's the whole reason that discipline is usually introduced as a solution in the first place. Of course, wouldn't it be great if we were motivated to do things all the time? Of course. So that's why we just do things with discipline, right? You're probably thinking, because we aren't going to be motivated to do things all the time. So that's absolutely true. But then what? So I just told you that discipline isn't good for you, that discipline isn't very good. Then I just said that motivation isn't very good either, that it doesn't exist. I disagreed with you. Actually, I agree entirely. Motivation really is not going to be present all the time. It's waxing and it's waning. We all know that, essentially. Otherwise, everyone would just do things all the time if it was always effortless and resistanceless. Now, because of that, there's a secret. And the secret is not some magic pill or something that I'm going to try and market as something crazy, but it is something that is pretty groundbreaking when you start to think of things this way. So here it is. You should actually be using discipline, but only to get the motivation that you need to do things. So I'll say that again. You're going to use discipline, but only to get motivation. So In other words, you actually are going to be disciplined, and you do need to be disciplined, but you're going to use that reliability, that discipline, that consistency that you get with discipline when you force something and you do it regardless of how you feel, and you're going to use that to get the mental benefits and motivation. You're going to do whatever is necessary with discipline to make sure that you're motivated. So, for me, and I think for many others, this is the best possible way to manage your mental energy and your discipline and your motivation and your inspiration, is in this way, using discipline and being disciplined, but in a way that aligns to your motivations, in a way that feeds into your human purpose, and a way that actually gives you the energy to do things that you want to do and things that make you feel good. Using discipline, but in the end, being driven by motivation, which actually makes you feel much better about what you're doing at the end of the day and gives you all those benefits that we talked about with motivation. That kind of resistanceness in your actions, this kind of natural drive to do what you're already doing, yet at the same time, the consistency of discipline, because you are going to be disciplined. So this isn't a magic pill. It still requires you to use willpower, and it still requires you to build the skill of discipline over time. Because if you don't have any discipline at all, then obviously this isn't really going to help you, because discipline is still going to be necessary to get the initial motivation and to get that ball rolling. So discipline is actually extremely important, which is, of course, the answer of this video. And my actual take on, is motivation better than discipline? You need discipline, but you should actually use it for motivation as well. So to go forward with this, what I would suggest is to experiment. So experimentation is always going to be key for finding anything that works for you, and try finding what might give you motivation. So I'll give you 3 specific examples maybe that you could possibly be useful to you, but in general, it's just going to be looking for different perspectives, trying to find other things, maybe even talking to other people, looking online, other resources to find what could actually work for you. But 3 things that have worked for me in the past and that might work for you to give yourself motivation is, first, to surround yourself by people who inspire you, or people who motivate you to do whatever the thing is that you want to do, that you've already thought about, that gives you motivation and drive in your life. So it could be a change in environment. Of course, this is often going to be easier said than done, but you could look for a change in environment. You could just try and find, you could just hang out with people that you know give you that type of inspiration. It could be even a change in a job site, of course, which again, it's going to be easier said than done for a lot of people. So the second thing is going to be just thinking by yourself. It could be that you actually sit down and write something out, or that you just sit with your own thoughts and really just like explore your past experiences or your inspirations, or whatever it is internally that drives you to do that thing. Just sit with them for a while. Maybe that's all it takes for you to get that motivation, is to just be surrounded by your own thoughts and really just assess your own motivations, kind of like what we did previously in this video. Or it could actually be just doing some small project, just using willpower to force yourself to do some small project, something that maybe is related to whatever it is that you're working on, that really reminds you and it makes you feel good about what you're doing. And it gives you kind of that innate drive again, and kind of makes you excited, makes you feel like a kid again about what it is that you're doing. So resistance is going to be natural with all of these things, so don't expect perfection. But what matters is that you actually keep that internal drive to keep pursuing something further, and that you never get to the point where you kind of feel like a stalling engine. You just push it harder and harder and harder, trying to get it to move. Because most often, if you're doing that, it's never going to be the way. So if you also find that you actually don't have a lot of discipline in the first place, or that's a situation that you're in, that's just fine. Discipline is something that can be built over time. Remember, is a skill. That's what we said, is that discipline quite generally can be built over time as a skill. But the thing is that once you keep building that discipline, whatever it is, don't expect perfection. You're going to use it right away to try and get motivation, not just force all of your actions and all of your not just forcing all of your actions and all of your work using just discipline. So when you are trying to build discipline, if that is something that you're trying to do, just keep in mind that resistance is going to be completely natural. Things aren't going to be perfect, that things may be waning back and forth. The thing is that you keep moving, whether it's very, very slowly, but just keep moving forwards little by little, and be just completely straightforward and honest with yourself, and not too hard on yourself. Because the truth is, if you're trying to make a change, resistance and difficulty and non-consistency are going to be essentially guaranteed in any pursuit like that. The point is that you're generally moving upwards. That's all that matters. And you really don't need to be comparing yourself to any other people or to any perfect ideal. So take care of your mind, especially when you don't feel like it.